Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio, the video game discussions podcast where we do deep dives and analyze all of our favorite games and some of yours too. This week, a topic episode, a roundtable discussion on criticism as a whole, gaming criticism, what it means to be a critic, etc. As always, I have to thank the patrons up top. It is them that make this show possible. Major thank you to all of the patrons. If you want to be like these fine folks, you can check out the website at www.patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. You'll find links to that in the description of the episode. In the episode description, you'll also find information about my two guests. First, a returning guest to the show, we've got Matt Stormageddon from the Fun and Games podcast. Matt, it's always a pleasure. How's it going?
Good. Thank you for having me. Always happy to be back. You never get tired of me trying to bully my way back onto your show, and I'm grateful for it because I love being here.
No bullying. You can come on anytime you'd like.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
We're also joined by a new guest, a first-timer on the show, but a friend of the show all the same. A local celebrity around these parts, some might say. We've got Quest64 Official here, otherwise known by his Christian name as Mike. That's also his podcast name, Mike. How's it going, man? Thanks for joining us today.
It's good. It's always good to be around Matt and find reasons to put my voice in front of his face and use his stardom to be on the internet. So, and good to be here with you, Rick. I've been a long-time listener, so, why not be a short-time voice as well?
I am thrilled that you're both here. Mike, this episode actually sort of came about through your suggestion, although it's something that I've been wanting to do myself for a while now. For those that are new to the show, generally we cover games from start to finish in a sort of traditional book club style, analyzing the plot and the narrative, going through themes, mechanics, music, things like that. But especially now that we're weekly, to help me, this is a pragmatic decision. We are going to be doing more of these sort of roundtable discussion episodes. And this episode in general is all about criticism. What it means to be a critic, the video game critic landscape as a whole, things like that. It's going to be a little broad, but some of the things that we're going to touch on today are what a critic is, what the function of a critic is, the role of a critic, how do critics help the general public, what do we perceive to be the best practices for criticism, how one can find and hone in on critics they trust, things of that nature. I wanted to give a couple of disclaimers up top before we begin, though. First of all, as is the case with any episode, our feelings and thoughts can change and will grow as time goes on. So even if you're listening to this a few months, a few weeks outside of release, it's entirely possible that some of the things that we're talking about here might have a little more nuance or change within them. That's just how life goes. To that end, if you find anything that we're talking about that you would like more clarification on or disagree with, or just want to keep the conversation going, I implore you again, send us a message in the Discord server. It's free to join and you can jump in and keep this conversation going. In episodes like this, more especially than episodes on games. The second thing before we jump into it is this, as I said, this topic is a little bit broad. We each have ideas on where we're going to go. That being said, the pressure of being on mic and just how natural conversation works, there certainly will be things that maybe deserve elaboration that don't get elaborated upon in this episode. So again, this is not, I never aim to end a conversation with a punctuation mark, semicolon, if anything, as I've kind of glibly said on the show before. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about it. So Mike, you were the one that sort of helped me put this episode on the map. I had wanted to do it and we were talking about potentially doing an episode together. And you specifically mentioned wanting to talk about the criticism landscape in video games. So I wanted to sort of kick it to you. And since you are the guest that has never been here before, I wanted to kick it to you to see what your general thoughts on this might be. What made you want to do an episode about criticism in video games specifically?
I guess, like you said, views change. And even like when I pitched this to you 6 months ago or whatever, like I occasionally get upset about things, or I soften my stance on things online, and the ebb and flow of humanity, I guess. But when we originally talked about it, like, the thing that I think about the most is that the mantra of critics or professional criticism of video games, their mantra is that it's essential, that critical review of video games is essential, because without that, who would hold game companies accountable for release mistakes and to monitor the quality of games? And it's not just games, it's like art criticism in general. If you don't have professional criticism, how do the standards of that art medium maintain or improve if you just release everything? So then, in this, the Lord's year of 2025, Matt and Rick, now that we have more video game reviewers than ever, YouTube and all of social media, and then websites that have expanded. So we have more video game reviewers than we've ever had. Have games gotten exponentially better as the number of professional game critics has grown exponentially? Like, has the more game criticism made video games better as critics say that it does?
There is a presupposition in there if I've ever heard one. Before we dive into that, because that does go into what I was hoping to talk about today, Matt, I invited you specifically on. First of all, thank you, Mike. I'm glad that we got to put this together. And Matt, I thought would be a perfect third person to invite on, because they not only work very closely with folks in the critical space, but they talk about games a lot on myriad podcasts and do a lot of writing and etc. And I think, having known Matt for a while now, that their opinion is very level-headed, and just Matt's good at what Matt does. so I thought Matt would be a perfect third panelist here to talk about games criticism. Anything that you wanted to tack on to what Mike said, Matt, before we dive right in? Because that's going to be a perfect segue into what is a critic and what is the role of a critic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting topic, right? There's this sense that with the kind of leveling of the playing field with social media and YouTube specifically, and how it's for the user, it's for the everyman, as it were, the every person, to degender it. It is a good question, and it is something I think about a lot too. And I appreciate you saying such nice things about my work, and writing game reviews is a thing that I've come fairly recently to. I wrote music reviews back in the day, used to review albums. I have a very old magazine, 2-page spread on Kiss's farewell album, maybe the third farewell album, who knows at this point. It was
You're a Kiss fan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a greatest hits Kiss fan. I like their albums too, but I know the broader hits better. But that said, there are several albums that I truly love by them. But yeah, so anyway, getting back to the point. So I've been writing on and off for a long time. I used to have my own music website where I write reviews and stuff like that. And it's funny, I've only felt comfortable calling myself a writer or a critic recently. And Jeff and I use the words critic and journalist very loosely when describing ourselves, because we're indie, and I try not to have too big a head about it. But I think that a big reason I was excited to come on this episode is, one, yes, I have a lot of friends who are in and around the games journalism space. As it contracts, it expands and contracts, mostly contracting these days. There are a lot of common misconceptions about reviews that I've fought head on. I don't really argue in the comments of places, but every time I see the sentiment that, they paid for that good review or they paid for that bad review, my head catches fire, like Johnny Storm, no relation. And so, I wanted to talk about that kind of stuff too, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about critique, not just for games, but I think broadly. And I think with the way it can elevate a medium, like Mike was talking about, or whether it does or not, I think it's also important to understand what it's like from the other side as a critic, and what the expectations are, both professionally and then, audience-wise, and what some of those misconceptions are and why they aren't real or are real, depending on where we're looking at it from, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So all of this is sort of spiraling into what is a critic, what is their role. So let's talk a little bit about that. That's part of the reason why I wanted to put this episode together. Something that I've noticed is, and this is twofold. One, that there is a tendency in video game criticism and criticism in general, but in video game criticism, especially for new critics or amateur critics. And I'm using that non-pejoratively, amateur, just meaning you don't get paid a lot of money to do it, to be hyper negative. And this is something that I'm going to put a pin in, and we'll come back to it later. But the second reason is sort of going into what is a critic. I've noticed now, especially with the prevalence, the ubiquity of social media, and especially YouTube and TikTok, that what a critic has become much more diffuse and less rigid. We're seeing new forms of criticism come out. The YouTube video essay is a big one. The micro version of that within TikTok, the Stitch, is huge. That's one of the biggest content sharing platforms right now. And because of this, I think it's worth examining what the role of a critic is, because we're seeing more and more folks get into sharing their critical thoughts, sharing their takes, whether it's about a tweet, about a TikTok, about a game, book, television show, or film. And that is okay, but I think it has double-edged potential. I think there are implications both for good and for ill on just it sort of being a y'all come, anybody can share whatever they want, which is social media as a whole, but that's another topic. So what is a critic? Mike, what you had mentioned has some pretty major assumptions built into it, that critics inherently exist to improve the art form. So let's start there. Is the role of a critic to improve the art form which they are critiquing?
Are you asking me or telling me that is?
I am asking the room in general, and whoever answers first can go on with it.
Well, Matt is the critic, but this is something that I have been told by a friend who I won't call out for this, but is a music critic, like Matt was in one point, or still is. Huge Kiss fan, Matty Storm. By both a music critic and a couple different video game critics, that is the purpose of professional critique, is to be the, I don't want to say middleman, but to be the everyman for the common people. So if I was trying to enjoy art, I know nothing about like painting, for example. If I was trying to enjoy that and I went to an abstract gallery and didn't know what I was looking at, I was just there looking. The purpose of a critic or a liaison at that art gallery would be to guide me through like history of the medium, and then expand my horizons and help me understand what I'm looking at or what I'm attempting to enjoy. So video games aren't that complicated. They're not like, 18th century Renaissance painting or something like that. They're just video games. But we used to have a ton of magazines, and my parents, I'm sure other parents, same thing, would go to stores and ask people who worked at the store at, Sears or JCPenney or Target or whatever, is this game any good? And they would say things like, well, Nintendo Power said it's pretty good. Or, whatever. EGM said it was a pretty decent game. And that would fuel the purchase, of a video game for their children. So to have those go between people is important for any art medium. So you would think that the idea is, yes, those critics are there to make the medium better by making more people understand it and keeping people from purchasing poor video games, which developers shouldn't be, quote unquote, rewarded for producing.
That's so interesting. And you're right. And it's funny, as someone who used to work at a GameStop many, 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 many years ago, and a whole other lifetime ago, that I hadn't even conceived of that, like being a factor in this, but you're absolutely right. It's funny. I don't disagree that the role of a critic is to expand the art form. I mean, I think something that I've fought about online a lot, and I don't pick many fights, is that the video games is one of the youngest art forms. It's the most unregulated critic space, as we just discussed, right? Almost anyone can do it. You can do it for other stuff too, but I feel like there are more, the Academy and all of that for movies and so on and so forth. Like there are more official, I don't want to say award shows, but like there are broader structures that help regulate criticism on the broad for other mediums, whereas video games sort of had that when those magazines were around. We definitely have less of it now as every company that wants more money decides to close worthwhile outlets, but I won't go off on that tangent quite yet. And so I think part of why I agree with Mike, but I think it's just not always the case in the environment we're in, is because it's so unregulated. It's because anyone can do it. And those that do regulate it, I'm thinking of like Geo Media and Kotaku. Geo Media only cares about money. They don't care about what Kotaku writes. The folks who work at Kotaku do, but the company doesn't. They want clicks, they want headlines, they want interaction, right? And so, and this is probably true of other mediums too, I'm just not as steeped in those. The money, the profit side of it is what kind of infects what the purpose of a critic is from their perspective versus maybe the audience and the art form. And I think that's where like a lot of this kind of hits an impasse, is like once the money's involved at the higher level. But I fear I'm getting a little ahead of myself.
No, I totally understand what you mean. The two of you hit on something here. The notion that Game Power said it's good, so I recommend buying it, and Kotaku writers wanting people to click on their article. They want to view it. Of course, in both of these, sales is a factor, but let's start from the supposition that sales isn't a factor at this time. Let's set that aside for now. I would argue here, I actually do really disagree with that a critic's role is helping shape the medium. I don't think they have that power. I think, okay, one thing at a time. First of all, I think Game Power said it's good, so buy it. Kotaku wants clicks. I think the chief role of a critic related to both of these is being an arbiter of taste. Something that I saw a quote from the show called Loudermilk. I don't know if either of you are familiar with that. I've never heard of this before at all. But apparently it's about critics. And when asked what the role of a critic is, one of the characters said, quote, "In the pure diarrhea that is pop culture, you need somebody who's going to be able to find and curate the hidden gems. That's my job. I got to figure out and understand what that artist is trying to do and then inform others." End quote. I also have an essay that I really like called "The Limits of Critique" by Rita Felsky. She is a literary critic, and this essay that she wrote, "The Limits of Critique," is all about literary criticism, but I think it's pertinent and germane here. I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to start with this idea of being an arbiter of taste. The reason that I don't think critics have the power to help shape the art form that they are critiquing is because as somebody that has been a creator in a few different mediums, classical music, jazz music, amateur video game criticism, being the critic, both the person being critiqued and a critic, I don't really have any delusions that critics, and I don't mean to call them delusions, but I don't really have any assumptions that critics have that kind of power. It's not that I don't think that's a noble goal to want to better the culture and better the art form, but I don't think that creators are thinking about that whenever they're creating in the medium that they choose to. Composers are more likely to listen to the opinions of other musicians and composers, not folks writing for the Star Journal. I would assume it's the same with video game devs. I don't know. I don't approach this as a way to hope that I can change the medium by and you know, I'm being a bit glib here and I apologize, but even the bigger podcasts, let's say your Watch Out for Fireballs, I would be shocked if they felt that they did have that kind of power. I don't mean to speak for anybody, but I think it comes down to more being a collector and a guide, going back to your museum example, Mike, of what good taste is and how to think about your taste beyond I like it or I don't like it, to give you more arrows in your quiver to shape your taste, to speak intelligently about your taste. And if that happens, to shape the local creativity at the local level of your scene, then that's all well and good. But I think it's rooted in this idea of being a tastemaker, of being a sort of Sherpa to refinement. I don't know. I've kind of blabbed for 3 minutes straight. Did I say anything of value? I don't know. But I don't know. What do you think of that? What do you think of that as the role being less of a shaper of the medium and more of a Sherpa of taste, an arbiter of taste? What are your takes on that?
I don't think either is wrong. I think what's interesting is I think what Mike, I don't want to put words in Mike's mouth, but I think broadly, I would agree that critics can affect the landscape and do improve the quality of things in the same way that a good journalist would, digging into the bad in the games industry and the good. But I do think the role of modern critics and creators is the tastemaker because it's personality driven, right? I think about the reviewers I love that I've been reading for a long time. I won't say how long because then it shows how ancient I am, and we don't need to get into how old I am. But I've been reading them for a long time, and I don't always agree with them. But like when a new game of a certain genre, for example, comes out, I know that that reviewer is going to give me a good take on it, even if I don't agree with them, because they are very meticulous. They like that genre. They know what they're looking for. They've been playing those games a long time. And I know from personal experience when I am writing a review, so to give some context for those who may not be familiar with one of my podcasts, Fun and Games, Jeff and I always say on that show that every game is somebody's favorite, right? Good, bad, and different qualities are relevant to loving a video game. You can love any game if it means something to you, if you enjoy it, because you can find joy in anything, just about. And so from that perspective, incorporating that into the product that is the reviews that we do within Fun and Games or outside of it, I'm mostly reviewing a game to share why I loved it or why I didn't love it. Not that you should hate this because I hated it, but here are the things that bothered me, that didn't work, that I thought did work. It's why I use the structure I use, because then someone could read it and go, okay, I like Matt's thoughts on games, and this is a game that Matt liked or didn't like. Here are the things why. Well, that now I can use that to decide, is this something I want to, right? In that tastemaker kind of way, right? You're reading my review and going, okay, well, Matt did or didn't like these things. Those things sound good or bad. I will use that information, like a curator at a museum or at an art gallery, to then go make my own choice about games or whatever. And I think part of that also is I know my own bias comes into writing about games. And anyone who says that a good review should be free of bias doesn't know what they're talking about. I think that's part of what is this tastemaker thing that I agree with Rick, is you're a tastemaker because you have a kind of taste in a thing and you're sharing that. I think that you can write a review objectively, but that's also then a very boring review because there's no, again, if it's personality driven, if I'm listening to an episode of Pixel Project Radio about, say, Celeste, I want to hear what Rick Firestone or Josh Koval or Matt Storm thinks about that game, because I trust their taste. I love how they dissect those games. And I think at one point, critique was definitely responsible for moving the medium forward and still is. But I would agree that now it's more focused on taste making because of how it's evolved, especially as more amateur and early experience creators get into that space and try and find their voice by doing it, because that's how we all find it.
There are two things that I want to talk about there, but I jumped in front of Mike, so I'm going to let Mike go first. But two very important things that you touched on there that I'm going to write down so we can get to here in a moment.
So once again, I feel like this is a really good trio because we're okay with trying to be objective about being subjective in this medium. I do agree with the notion that you can find a tastemaker, as you two put it, and that aligns with the way that you play games, the things you enjoy, and you can follow them to new things that you may not have discovered, especially in video games. You know, there's plenty of video games. You're never going to play them all. But like Rick said when we opened the episode, we've been thinking about this particular podcast for 6 months now, and our views may have changed. So if I became friends with Matt when they played Mass Effect 1 and then followed your career all the way to Andromeda, am I supposed to assume that your taste in Mass Effect games or in games in general did not change over the course of that 12 years? So even if I liked the first game as much as you, and then maybe our opinions slightly different on Mass Effect 2, and then we get to 3 and wildly different opinions about the ending of Mass Effect 3. And then I decide I don't want to play Andromeda because of the ending of 3, but you loved it. Am I now looking for another tastemaker, or am I supposed to use that as an eye-opening experience? Like, well, Matt's tastes have changed. Should mine as well, or should I be looking elsewhere? I feel like people who are being paid for a subjective medium ask for a degree of loyalty, I guess is the best way to put it. The alternative is to find, a lot of people say, find a group, find a Discord, find a backlog community, or follow people on OpenCritic. But is that any like crowdsourcing 20 opinions? Is that any different than following one or two more refined tastemaker opinions? I feel like there's too much leeway with trust, I guess, is the best way to put it. Like Matt said, there's a lot of miasma in the critical space now. A lot of people calling themselves, video game journalists and critics, and
we're here to gatekeep them.
Exactly. Yes, we are. There's a lot of people with so I know Rick has said this at least one time on the show. He believes his show is better than the amount of viewers he has right now.
Well, when you say it like that, it makes me sound like a fucking dick.
We are dicks, but no, it does. You do. I would come on the show specifically because I want to talk to you in person because I appreciate it. Same with Matt. I'm sure you've wrote at least one or two things in your career you were incredibly proud of, and you thought, how is my critique not as good as, insert this YouTuber who has 40 million followers and writes, 50 word reviews saying that Quest 64 sucks and he didn't even play the game past the first 10 minutes. How is one critic's voice different than a more squeaky wheel critic, I guess? I'm trailing off now because I'm getting angry about one thing and I can't get it out of my mind, but it'll be later on in the show, I'm sure. But like I said, there's a certain amount of trust you have in people. Do you trust that they are growing with you? Or do you need to break that and look for more broad opinions? And then where do you find those opinions? You can't trust one tastemaker to lead you to another, I guess is the way to put it.
I'm pleased that you went this route because it's going to unpin something that I had mentioned that Matt was touching on. And it's this idea we are in an overabundance. We are paralyzed by choice. That is, those are the shackles that we are bound by now. We have so many competing voices in this ocean of folks that want to jump in to be critics. And I was being glib. I don't know why I'm using that word so much today. I was being facetious a little bit whenever I said that we're here to gatekeep. We are, of course, not. And I think it is a net good that more people than ever are expressing themselves in a critical way. The best way to enhance a culture in its taste, in its group intelligence, is for us to work together, to build up our neighbors who can then build up us. That is the key to how we are going to progress as a society. And this goes way beyond just taste in video games and stuff like that. That's your didactic little pithy saying from me in this one. But I want to touch on this idea of overabundance. It is more important than ever now to know, for critics to know their audience, sure, but for the audience to know their critic. You had mentioned, Mike, or perhaps it was you, Matt, or perhaps it was both of you, this idea of a review from IGN or Kotaku versus something from Matt. Those are different things, and this goes back to, as much flack as Dunkey gets sometimes, and I don't agree with it. I've been a big fan of Dunkey since 2012. he made a couple of videos on critics that got really panned by people. People got mad about it, but he was spot on. When you have these big farm websites that farm reviews by writers that are really just trying to pay their bills and get their work out there, that have to meet these deadlines through crunch, and there's no shortage of them, you're really spinning the wheel, you're really taking a gamble on whose voice you're getting from a review. And I'm not just picking on IGN or Kotaku. It can be any big name site, but that's why I think it's really important to know the names behind the work. If I go to Matt and Matt starts talking about a JRPG and Matt says, I really like this or I really didn't, I can pull on the knowledge of Matt the critic and say, Matt's favorite game of all time is Chrono Trigger. I know this. Because I know this, I can now interpret what Matt is saying about this new JRPG in a lens that is appropriate. Same could be said for me. One of my favorite games of all time, Final Fantasy IX. When I talk about a JRPG, there is the precedent of knowing the medium, knowing the genre, knowing the history. Versus when I talked about Spec Ops The Line, which is a game that I love, I'm very proud of that episode, I don't know anything about first-person shooters. So if somebody were to listen to that and say, well, I don't really agree with what he was saying, blah, 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 that's fine. They could say, well, he doesn't really know the history. He doesn't know the medium. And it can go both ways. You know, if Matt hated JRPGs and Matt said, I sure do love this JRPG, to me that says, okay, this is somebody that's not into the genre that likes this game. That means that that's either a spectacular fucking JRPG or it does something that subverts the genre. It is different in some way. It is important to know the voice of one's critic for this reason, because we can then make informed choices on how to interpret their words and their work. It doesn't mean anything when somebody, I don't know, some mage on Twitter that's not nearly as well read as they think they are says that Quest 64 is a bullshit game, because they're not demonstrating, well, one, they're not making a good argument in any way. I don't like them. But which is the closest I'll ever get to shit talking on this podcast. But they're not demonstrating that their voice has weight behind it, right? Versus Mike, you are the Quest 64 guy. If you come out and start talking negatively about Brian's journey for the Game Boy Color, that has more weight behind it than if I were to talk negatively about it, because you are more steeped in the knowledge of that IP. Does what I'm saying make sense? To summarize it, the voice of the critic is almost as important, maybe more important than what they're actually saying. Kind of full stop. Like I kind of firmly believe that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And you touched on something that I think is important. There is a difference between criticism and judgment. And that's why SideQuest, the series that I've done for a long time, not to keep shilling my nonsense, is about loving something, not about whether it's good or not. And I think there's a difference, right? If someone comes out and says, and to keep picking on Quest 64, a game that I do quite love, if someone comes out and says Quest 64 sucks, that's not criticism, because they haven't given reasons or examples. And this is popular. Something that drove me nuts on Twitter, because I'll never call it the other thing, was I would post, I love this game. Everyone should go play this game. It's a great game. I love it. Here's why I love it. And someone would come in the comments inevitably and go, oh, but that game sucks. It's not very good. Okay. This isn't helpful. Why would you post this? Because they think they're critiquing it. They're not, though. They are just sharing their opinion, which they're entitled to have, but it adds no value to conversation, which is what old school Twitter was designed behind. I think that's what drives me nuts most about critique, is that some modern armchair critics, like armchair lawyers and the like, who exist on social media, is they want to judge things but not actually critique them. If someone tells me that Sonic 06 sucks because it's got horrible lag, the design isn't good, the levels aren't well made, the music isn't composed well, everything's crunchy, that gives me something to work off of. That's critique. That's something that we can talk about and discuss. But if they say it sucks because it's bad, it's an opinion, which can be valuable to some also, but it doesn't expand criticism. And I think knowing your voice and knowing the voice of others helps with that. I think also really quickly to touch on what Mike was talking about, one versus the many. I think one of anything is bad. I think if someone wants to follow my work and thinks I am the end all be all when it comes to critique, one, they are out of their mind. But two, I'm humbled, but it's not good. I think that you need like a balanced breakfast or that we were sold since we were kids, or, the food pyramid, and you're eating your vegetables. I think having a healthy balance of a variety of different voices in your orbit allows you to better understand the interpretations of that art. I think having critics that you don't agree with are important. I don't really follow Yahtzee anymore. Zero Punctuation has had some ups and downs. But when I did watch it, I liked it because I think only half the time I agreed with what Yahtzee was saying about a certain video game. And yeah, part of the shtick was he was poo-pooing on stuff and people liked to hear him be angry and British. But I think that critics like that are valuable because when I don't agree, well, why don't I agree with you? Well, that seems off base. Well, then I'll go play the game anyway because I don't agree with you. And that pushes me also in the direction of like, well, I know you don't like these kinds of games. And so if you don't like it, maybe I will like it because you don't, right? And I think that range of information is totally important. I think that trusting just one voice in the industry, you can do it. And I have done it in the past, but I think having a variety of voices in your orbit allow you to better build this knowledge base of how to then even critique stuff on your own, right? Because we're all critical of a lot of stuff. And I think the role of a critic is to also teach you how to be critical. I think some of my favorite podcasts like Waypoint Radio, which became Remap Radio, was pulling politics into video games and talking about, diversity and other things and things that are missing in the games industry. And I never thought critically like that about games before. Crunch, all of those things, until I started listening to that podcast and I heard voices talking about why it's bad that this third game in a series has another generic white man being the main character. It's just not something I thought about when I was younger. And so I think having that diversity of voices allows you to then also learn things you might not know. It's very easy to be sheltered if you are sheltered, kind of a thing.
The diversity of voices is really important, and the diversity of diet in anything. Not just actual diet. Yes, eat your vegetables, very important. My favorite are Brussels sprouts. But having a diverse palette when it comes to your games, when it comes to literature, when it comes to any of the fiction you're consuming, right? A diet, as much as I adore Studio Ghibli, a diet based solely on Studio Ghibli will be deficient in some areas. It's just as a diet exclusively eating red meat will be deficient in certain areas that aren't cholesterol and blood pressure, probably. And that's really important, especially, this is a charged sentiment that I'm about to say, and I recognize that, and I hope that listeners that know me have the trust in me as a critic to know what I do and do not mean. And of course, I'm happy to elaborate, but it is good, I believe, full stop good, to be familiar with those who are your opinion opponents. Those who are your, I don't want to say opposition because that paints the pictures of active conflict, and that is not what discussions are all the time. But being familiar with those who hold opposing viewpoints to a degree is almost always beneficial. If for no other reasons, you want to be familiar with them so you know what their talking points are and how you can destroy them with facts and logic, right? If for nothing else. But I do think that it's beneficial to take that in. And I'm saying this healthily. There are exceptions. We can't list them all, but if you're thinking, well, what about this harmful exception? It's probably, ignore it. But I don't agree with a lot of Dunkey's takes on games. I don't agree with a lot of Scott the Waz's takes on JRPGs, but I love them both very much, and I appreciate listening to them. I don't necessarily know that I'm going to love Quest 64, but I will appreciate hearing Mike's point of view whenever we talk about that. I don't know that I am particularly, going to love Death Stranding, but I'm going to appreciate hearing folks that do talk about it and folks that don't talk about it. I think that's really important. I don't want to jump, Mike, I don't want to jump in front of you again. There's a point about sincerity that I still have a pin in, but I want to give Mike a chance to respond before we divert the topic once again.
No, good stuff. But we led the show. I don't want everything be but and Mike be the other guy, but we led the show with Rick saying that you don't think that a game critic or group of game critics can change the landscape. I do mostly agree with you. But now we've spent the last, however long, 45 minutes talking. We're talking about how us as video game players should view critics who are also video game players. You're talking about Scott the Woz and Maddie was, we're musing about Donkey and everybody now. But we all are fairly seasoned 30 or 40-year-old video game players who don't necessarily need somebody to tell us something. We want to broaden our horizons and experience new things. I still think that video game critique and criticism does have an effect on the 60% of the population that doesn't listen to a video game podcast every day of the week while they work or play a game, can finish a 40-hour game like Dave Jackson every single week and then do a show about it or, whatever. There's a lot of people who are deeply influenced positively or negatively by just opening up Wikipedia before they tell their kid they can, download a game on Nintendo's eShop based on the Wikipedia entry for a classic Super Nintendo game or, like Earthbound, for example. Before they let their kids play Earthbound, they want to check up on it. They've never played Earthbound in their life. They want to know what it's about. You could see some really weird stuff Googling Earthbound or going to Earthbound's Wikipedia page that as a parent that I'm a parent too with 3 kids and I've experienced this. Looking at the games that they're interested in, I'm like, why do you want to play, Roblox or Wobbly Life or Human Fall Flat or all these other things, physics games. Like this looks, without being reductive, this looks so stupid. But I understand that they're using their creativity. As long as I don't see something strictly negative about a game or about the way that the community online perceives the game, whatever, let them play what they want to play. But I am a video game player and I trust my kids to be able to pick games that they think they will enjoy, and I'm just guiding them. But I am not every parent. There are tons of parents and tons of friends and, all walks of life, different statures of people whose trust just Wikipedia. So they look up Quest 64 on Wikipedia and they see that the, game ranking score of it is 54%. And then they look at the reviews below it and they're like, maybe I don't need to spend $20 at the retro game store for my kids to play Quest 64. And that's just surface level. I do want to go on a big tangent about how I can't submit Quest 64 scores to Metacritic because, even though official Nintendo magazine said it was an 84 and Player One magazine said it was an 80 and Console Mag gave it an 84, you can't submit those professional critiques to Metacritic to get that game ranking / Metacritic score up, because that's also not how critique works. It's still like Maddie said, there's money behind it and it would cost money to update the Quest 64 entry on the site. You have to pay somebody to do that. And you can't trust the average person to edit it like Wikipedia. It has to be professionally, molded to have the correct score. So I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of broad stroke, general game critique and review that has a broader impact on people who don't experience video games or have, 40 JRPG 30 or 3-hour introspective podcasts under their belt. They're just people who want to buy games for their kids and they want to know if Xenoblade Chronicles 2 or something is something that their kids would enjoy. I don't think there's always somebody there for them. I don't think as a parent that game criticism is always there for people who don't know games.
That's a fair point. We can, as much as I did say, I don't think game critics shape the choices game devs make, we can spin this out and say that game critics provide a voice to the people, the folks that are parents maybe that haven't gamed in years, just want to see what their kids are playing. They trust those voices. They then vote with their wallets and their dollars, and that eventually impacts how that studio exists financially and then potentially can change the course of the work that they put out. In that way, totally. Yeah, gaming criticism can affect the trajectory of the art form. Totally. And I'm sure there's a money aspect to it too. I'm always hesitant to speak on business matters because I don't really consider myself to know. I'll put it curtly, I'm dumb as hell when it comes to the business side of things. I really there are too many gaps in my knowledge to give an opinion that I would feel comfortable putting my name on. So a lot of the times I do sidestep that, and that's on me. That's one of my biases as a critic that people should know going in, is that I maybe am not the guy to go to when it comes to business talk. You know, who am I?
I mean, thankfully, gamesindustry.biz exists for that. Well, sort of still exists for that, unfortunately. But yeah, no, I mean, I think, well, and what's funny is, Mike, you're not wrong, but also, like, I know a podcast called Spawn Point where two gamer parents who are now raising gamer kids talk about parenting as a gamer and what's good and what's bad, and they've done articles on Roblox and, you know, why does Nintendo constantly not let multiple people pick Princess Peach, so his two daughters fight over Princess Peach every time in every game. And I think the biggest problem about modern criticism, I think in all genres, but we're speaking to games, is the nicheness of it is still not super well communicated because, again, it's disparate. It's not all under one roof. And I think Google is sort of our friend, but like you can Google anything and usually find a result that's helpful, good or bad. And I think the problem is that it's not that they're not out there, it's that we may not know how to find them, which is just as big a problem. And again, I only know this podcast Spawn Points exists because Patrick Klepek hosts it, and he's a parent and a journalist I followed for a very long time. We're similar in ages. He was on Waypoint, he's on Remap. Like, I don't know that I would have known that existed if I didn't know him, that specific reviewer, right? That specific critic. And so it's not really an answer. It's yeah, you're right, but kind of a thing.
I want to ask. I want to unpin this that I had put in earlier, and this goes back to one of the reasons that I wanted to make this episode. And I was hoping to talk to you two about it because I have strong feelings about this, and the two of you have sort of brushed up against it, and I'm wondering how you feel about it too. One of the things that I've noticed, again, I think as a whole, it's great that everybody that there is so many more voices being critical of everything online. Yes, there are those that abuse it, and now we live in a world where we have to amend every sentence with all of the possibilities. You said that you love vanilla. Why do you hate chocolate and pistachio? Freak. And then it, goes off. That's Twitter in a nutshell. But one of the things with critics that I notice a lot, whether it's somebody that's making a stitch, a video essay, a reply guy on Twitter, whatever, is that amateur critics, I find, tend to, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier, Matt, tend to approach criticism in a way where they weaponize judgment, where the criticism is beset on all sides, venomously dripping in judgment in a way that I don't think is productive. And to put it another way, I think that amateur critics or folks that just want to project an image of themselves as being learned, erudite, better than the art, detachedly better than the art in such a way that they can put themselves above it to critique it. They do this by being overly negative. Nitpicking and biased is Dunkey's whole thing. But it's, as much of a joke as he made it, it is true. Folks will detach themselves so they can put themselves above the art and talk down to it as a means of saying, I understand the art so much that I can say that this game, this novel, this play failed in some way. And they do it in a way that's not, I find, productive. It's more so to sort of bolster a self-image that they have. And I do think that's one reason that negative criticism is so rampant, is that it's rooted in self-image. I think another reason too, though, is that especially now, and I do wonder if looking back on the mid 2020s, we will see that this trend is going away. I feel like it is, but I can't speak authoritatively on this. But being negative distances us from seeming sincere. And seeming too sincere in our culture is seen as very naive. Naivety, overly saccharine naivety, too idealistic, too head in the clouds, not rooted in reality. It's just seen as being a negative thing. And I wanted, at this point, I want to read 2 quotes from the essay, The Limits of Critique by Rita Felsky. The first one is towards the beginning of the essay. She's just speaking about what she's going to tell you. One of my favorite things that I ever picked up from academia, best way to write an essay, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you told them. It works every time, at least for me. Here's what Rita says, quote, "In highlighting the salience of mood and method in criticism, I seek to kickstart a conversation about alternatives. What happens if we think of critique as an affective stance that orients us in certain ways, and as a particular cluster of conventions rather than a synonym for freewheeling dissidence or disembodied skepticism?" She goes on, "Critique is not just a questioning of routine, but a putting into places of new routines, a specific habit or regime of thought that schools us to approach texts in a certain manner." And I'd like to read one more, if you'll indulge me here. She says this, quote, "The notion of mood thus bridges the gap between thought and feeling. Mood accompanies and modulates thought. It affects how we find ourselves in relation to a particular object. Whether our overall mood is ironic or irenic, generous or guarded, strenuous or languorous, will influence how we position ourselves in relation to the texts we encounter and what strikes us. As most salient critical detachment is not an absence of mood, but one manifestation of it, casting a certain shadow over its object. It colors the texts we read, endows them with certain qualities, places them in a given light. A certain disposition takes shape, guardedness rather than openness, aggression rather than submission, irony rather than reverence, exposure rather than tact. Like any other repeated practice, it eases into the state of second nature, no longer an alien or obtrusive activity, but a recognizable and reassuring rhythm of thought. Critique inhabits us, and we become habituated to critique." End quote. I know that was long. I apologize. But that gets at the heart of what I'm saying here, is that we would rather be guarded than open, aggressive rather than submissive, steeped in irony. This is something that David Foster Wallace, my favorite author, David Foster Wallace, talked all about back in the 90s, this ironic detachment that is permeating society and stomping sincerity into the ground. I think that is a key reason why so many amateur critics and people that are just being critical online want to go to this judgment forward style of critique, rather than using judgment to an affect or one appropriate. They lead with that to seem detached, to distance themselves from sincerity so as to not come off as saccharine, naive, foolish. Do you know what I'm saying? I apologize. I'm going on and on. Loquacious is a word that I learned because I am it, and I apologize. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you see the same trend as I do, and do you get as worked up about it as me? Because this bothers me so much.
Yeah, it's so funny that you bring this up specifically because, for one, I do get as mad as you do, and I'm also a person who I've cried my whole life. I cry at things that make me happy. I cry at things that make me sad. I'm an empath. I listen to music very emotionally. If it's a sad song, likely I'll cry. If it's a sad video game, likely I'll cry. And that's considered soft and less than in some circles. This all comes, I think, on a broad scale, though we don't have time to dissect it. Patriarchal society, masculine means one thing, that's blah, blah, blah. But putting all that to the side for now, I think that it's in modern social media and modern algorithmic driven platforms, rage sells and rage bait gets interaction. And I think a lot of it comes from that. But moreover, the reason I said this is a perfect topic of discussion is because this made me so angry once that I launched a whole other sub-series of a podcast. Like, this is what SideQuest comes from. I think I've told this origin story in other places, but if you'll indulge me, Rick, I'm going to tell it again here. When Paper Mario: The Origami King was coming out, this was 2020, 2021, something around there. It's hard to remember dates. Time's a lake. But whenever that game was announced, there were a few screenshots that were shared on Twitter of the quote unquote combat that we didn't really know much about yet. And all I saw on this one image with, I think he was fighting the stapler boss, maybe, just comment after comment of, this looks dumb, this is going to be bad, what a terrible game, I can't believe they're making this. And it made me so angry because I looked at it and went, it's a picture. How can you judge an entire game by a picture? And I got so mad, I made side quests and made the first episode, and here we are. But like, it's this idea that I'm going to get further by just naysaying and being negative. And I miss sincerity, and it's coming back. And I think that you're right, Rick. I think this is starting to pivot back the other way because I liked being ironic and misusing it as much as anybody did when they were a teenager. But I think now there's this, like, I don't want to be a character. I mean, we're all a character on some level when on a podcast or on social media or whatever else. But like, there's a persona, as it were. But I do want sincerity to be in my work because it's important to me, and I think it should be more important to other people because I think we connect better through sincerity than we do through judgment and rage and rage baiting and all of that. I think that it is a habit that's bad, but again, folks like, I don't know, pull Mr. Beast out of the air because who cares if we talk badly about him? He's got more money than God at this point. The idea that doing something shocking or rage baity will get the clicks is because people like a headline that they can judge and immediately. This is all a subset of, I tirelessly watch my friends who are professional writers post an article about a thing, and then someone reply going, yeah, but this thing. And then they have to reply going, well, yes, that I addressed that in the article that you clearly didn't read.
Vanilla is just fine. Just because I like chocolate doesn't mean anything.
Right. It's this idea that the mission statement is the whole statement, and it's not. That's why writing exists. That's why podcasts exist. And yet I find myself doing it. I know Rick finds himself doing it too. There's this need to go, well, I feel this way. But also for all the folks online who probably don't actually exist and won't react to this, I'm going to curtail it or caveat it because that's the culture around critique now, is that you also have to protect your opinion because of the potential pushback for whatever reason, because context isn't always available. And it kind of drives me bonkers. It's why I've always been hesitant to call myself a journalist or critic, because that those words have a weight that I don't think they need. I think that you're a journalist if you do a journalism. Like do a business. You are a critic if you critique something, right? Are you a professional critic? Are you an amateur critic? It's kind of irrelevant. You're a critic if you're critiquing something, right? But I think we get lost in the sauce of like audience and popularity and social media and being an influencer, which a lot of people consider a dirty word, just like a YouTuber, but I don't think they are. I think they've got a connotation just like any other job or interaction that you think of the worst case, right? You think of the cliche. But I know plenty of people who are incredible influencers who have really great senses of fashion and style and all of these things. But I think we live in a world where the assumption is the bad thing, the negative thing, the how can I get attention, how can I be the center of attention, and that leads to taking shortcuts that are less nuanced, that are less kind or warm or inviting. And I think holding space for that is really important. And I'm glad you brought this up because clearly I have a lot of thoughts on it.
Yeah, that being noticed, that center of attentionness is what makes those forms of critique so sexy. It's what makes irony and rage baiting so sexy and enticing. It's quick and it's easy and it's thoughtless and it takes no effort at all. It's a way to participate in a greater conversation without putting much effort into it. I don't know, Mike. I'm sure you know this better than anybody here. I mean, I don't want to call it a persona. That's not what I mean. your online presence is sort of built around this sincerity. I've seen you in post after post reject this idea of ironic detachment, of shitting on things for the sake of shitting on them.
Yeah. The flip side of it is I've also been called things like toxically positive, or
that's not what that phrase means. That's
correct.
That's incorrect.
Yeah. It is. Correct. It is incorrect, but charged the way that it was said to me, like they knew what they were saying, and I knew what their uninformed words meant. That being said, yeah, a lot of I get a lot of messages that are, get real. Like, none of the stuff that you're saying online means anything. This is, this is like Maddie said, this is a character, this is a persona. What are you gaining by doing what you're doing online? In fact, but in a way I kind of relish that, because yeah, it's hard to pin down the things I do on social media because I don't have an objective. I can just say and do the things that I want because I don't have any financial backing or a Patreon or work for a company or have any interest in anything other than the things I want to do. And in a way, that's both like good and bad, because I think people that can achieve that kind of thing with a much broader audience than what I have, like Mr. Beast, for example, because you can't really pin down one thing that he does well other than makes money and spends it, is that those people are widely followed just because of that, like, that enigmatic stigma, I guess, of what are they doing? What is going on in the internet space? Why are they doing these things? And then when they say something sincere, you either have to take it as, oh, well, this is the actual person, or, well, this is meaningless to me. But I think that a lot of game journalism, this isn't a new concept. I had Sean Baby when I was a teenager, and he would say ridiculous things in EGM magazine, or was it Game Pro? One of the two. Either EGM or Game Pro. But he was half game reviewer, half comedian, and he would say things like, you get games like Bubsy 3D when you, let Phil Collins name your currency in Thailand, which is the dong, or, whatever. Everything of his was a punchline, everything was a joke. So you never knew if his feelings about games were sincere or not, but he was paid tons of money. He went on to have a pretty successful, video YouTube series. And people respect his opinions on things, but that came from a weird place of, what is this guy talking about? And I would say a lot of the biggest, most popular video game YouTubers probably grew from that kind of thing. It wasn't just, here's the ABCs of Chrono Trigger, because how would you ever differentiate yourself from anybody else doing that kind of thing? The impact that has, I have no idea, other than it muddies the waters even more. I have a lot of problem with Quest 64 because of people like RGT85, who's not a game critic but thinks he is, and Pro Jared, who now does some pretty good stuff, but for a long time did not do some very good stuff. And if you, Googled Quest 64, you'll still see his face, I'm sure, and his, 15 million views on his Quest 64 dump video and stuff like that. And that's my biggest problem with the landscape is I would much rather listen to you two. I would much rather see your opinions on the front page of Google when I search Quest 64, even though you haven't done stuff on it, but you will. Those are the voices that Game Critic doesn't shape the real world, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, if you go searching for proper game critique and taste making, it exists, and it's great. It's important, and I don't think that the people who are looking for it find it because of the loudest voices being at the forefront.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think about that a lot, the consequences of Spoony Bard. Or was that his YouTube name? Spoony? The one that did the very infamous FF8 and FF102 videos?
Yep.
Yeah.
Which admittedly, in a vacuum, they're kind of funny. But it's this society-wide irony. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said a million times before. This propensity to to ironic detachment that lets one, stay away from being sincere. Did I mean it? I don't know, because I'm just always so ironic and detached and sexy, and there's problems with that. That's interesting. I would have never pegged Pro Jared to be in that camp though. Like I generally find his stuff to be in mostly good taste. His public YouTube stuff to be in mostly good taste.
Yeah.
But he was a product of that decade as well. Like he wasn't, separate from Angry Video Game Nerd or anything. They were all doing the same thing. And now he does significantly less. He's a Wisconsinite and he's a cool guy. But that doesn't erase that video, and nothing ever will for me. But I know that he's grown. Like he has grown himself out of that, and he has straight up said that over our conversations. Is I would like to think that most of the people that were doing video game reviews in 2010 aren't the same person and have learned from that. And we were talking about our GT85, and he's like, some people haven't, and that's it was and that's true. That was a generational thing, and we all it's not like we didn't laugh about videos like that then, but to use them, especially as we're going barreling headfirst into an AI generated algorithm for every single thing, those loud things come to the forefront all the time, and it's hard to erase those. I personally know I've been trying to do it for years now. To shape the perception of just one game.
That's another conversation that I didn't even think of. These AI farm bots are being trained on this loud material.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is this, your Angry Video Game Nerd, your, I don't have any problems with, what's his name? James. I don't have any problems with James. Yeah. Good for him. But yeah, wow. That's really depressing to think of. One of you said that Google is like your friend earlier, and all I could think of was, is it? Because it used to be a joke that you type in your search query plus Reddit to get the results, but now I kid you not, I cannot search any other way, because otherwise I don't get reliable information. I still have the screenshot saved from when I Googled, and my Google picture is in the top corner. When I Googled who invented the backflip, and the AI summation was like, this was invented in 13 whatever by John Backflip, and his rival in town, Marcus Frontflip, convinced everybody that he was doing witchcraft. And I was like, why the fuck is this being suggested? Whatever. Whatever.
But Google being your friend was before the AI summary. Now the AI summary is useless. You scroll down past it, find someone who actually made a YouTube video about that quest you can't figure out in that game you're playing. Like that's how that goes. Yeah. And it's funny talking about the YouTuber thing too. It's like, so I've watched Angry Video Game Nerd for a long time, and he's actually started doing some more positive videos, doing more narrative stuff. Like he's evolved. Or I think about Scott DeWaz, who I love. I adore Scott. I've been watching kind of for a long time. What I love about him is that he is a loudmouth. He's a jerk. He's a jackass. That's the character. But then in those videos, there are these heartfelt moments where he talks about his past and things he truly loves or dislikes, and the sincerity still there amongst a comedy nonsense that I think is what makes it great. But then there are other YouTubers who I stopped watching, like JonTron, like Pro Jared, although Pro Jared's evolved, because in their early days, they were like, it was shock and awe. It was like saying effed up things, trying to get attention, whereas like Peanut Butter Gamer basically still does the same thing he did 10 years ago, but now he's married, has a kid, and acknowledges how ridiculous his life is, and I think there has to be some level of growth in this landscape and sincerity, otherwise you won't break through it. I mean, one of my favorite creators for the longest time was Gerard Dragon Rider Khalil, better known as the Completionist, and then after everything that came out with his charity fraud and he fought back against it, and this is a person that I've met several times, told was why I went into this stuff, and then all this stuff comes out, and now I don't watch his stuff anymore. I've kind of avoided it. I kind of detached myself from it. The thing that did it for me is when the Sea of Stars creators he was friends with took him out of their own video game. It was like, well, that's a pretty clear message to me. But he's someone who's still making videos, and as far as I know, isn't talking about this anymore. And why would he, right? He wants to move on, keep his audience, keep his career. But I think there has to be some level of realism and sincerity. And what drives me crazy about him as an example, not to pick on him, because he's a person like anyone else, is he did these videos, these updates. Here's where I'm at. I cherish my audience. I want to be real with you. I want to tell you these things. And then you find out that there's this other lie, and it's like, well, was he ever sincere then? I'm not here to judge that or have an answer. I'm just saying, for me, I questioned it. Whereas, like I mentioned, Peanut Butter Gamer, Scott the Woz earlier, they do update videos, and they are huge dorks talking about their lives, about what they've been doing, thanking you for watching their stuff, doing incredible charity things where the money actually goes where it needs to go. Like, it's just, I think that there's always going to be the people who rise to the top with the shock and awe and none of the sincerity. But then we are getting more stuff that does feel closer to, like, these people are just being themselves and want to share how they feel. But, like, I want to believe at this point, just from the content I consume, I did it. I used that word, the C word, content. The podcasts I consume, it's all folks more or less like us, more amateur voices in the space, people who've been doing it less time, although I've been doing it for a decade is terrifying to say out loud. Only 7 years in games, but, like, the idea that, you know, I guess not amateur then, indie, right? Independent, not making a ton of money, running off of Patreon. It's not our full-time job. I like those voices more because there is an inherent sincerity, because it can't be for the money because we're not making that much, right? And I think, I won't say that corporations ruin everything, although corporations ruin everything. But I think that the reason I always lean towards more independent voices, or voices that are powered under their own steam, their own audience, and not big bucks or whatever, which some of the YouTube sponsorship places lead you to, is because you can't bribe someone like that if they're not making money. Now, I've said a million times, if Xbox tomorrow buys Fun and Games, they can have it for $1 million. I'll start another podcast. It's not about selling out. It's about, I would love the money, and then I'll still go do my little independent thing. But that's me, right? And I think this is a whole other, like, consumerism, capitalism conversation that we don't have time to get into. But I think that, so I can stop rambling, that I think that you have to grow with your medium as a content creator, as someone who critiques, and as someone who consumes critique. You change your heart or die. David Lynch said it best, right? Like, you have to grow. You can't stagnate, because then you don't learn, and the people you influence don't learn, and the people around you don't learn, right? If you're a voice for change, you will affect change. That kind of simple idea.
Yeah, really well said. I don't think I have anything to add that could better elucidate that point. What I would like to do, just sort of in closing, we got a lot of responses in the community forum for this. For folks that are new and have made it through this long of an episode, first of all, if this is your first episode and you've made it this far, good for you. Hope to see you around. But the community forum is a Discord channel in the pixelprojectradio server, where I let folks know what we're going to be talking about, and they can give their succinct responses. Now, for this topic, I lifted that succinct idea. I said, come what may, say whatever you want, as long as you'd like, talk to us about game criticism. Now, what happened was we got a lot of responses, and a lot of them are long. So I will not be reading every single one, but I wanted to go through a couple just as we end this episode. Some of the stuff we've already talked about, some we haven't. But I'm going to read a couple here. Not all of them, just a couple. I will be leaving that forum post up, though, so folks can come back and interact with it if they'd like. Chris Physics, I meant to read this way earlier, at the end of one of his posts wrote this quote by Oscar Wilde: "The critic has to educate the public, the artist has to educate the critic," which I love. I love that.
Yeah.
We talked about that at length, I think. Adam from the Revival and Extinction podcast, paring this down a little bit, said, "I remember when I was a child reading the narratives that critics would be able to pull from their gaming journey, telling their own unique experiences to the reader with the use of varied vocabulary, colorful screenshots, and just an overall authentic experience. In today's world, it's more of a double-edged sword. Yes, everyone can put forward their own experience, be it a positive or negative one, but this has led to the professional space being oversaturated with articles that either the author hasn't been able to give their own point of view due to external factors, such as crunch time from editors, or outlets come from a real gatekeeper position in the industry." I think we've talked about that enough. I don't know that I personally have anything to say in addition to what I've said. Do either of you?
I mean, I just quickly will say nobody pays for reviews. It's a fiction. I'm going to keep saying it on every podcast. They don't pay for good reviews. They don't pay for bad reviews. Does that mean money doesn't change hands in places of business to influence things? No, of course it does. I'm not naive, but I know a lot of reviewers who are just getting by. And if someone paid them $1,000 for a review, they wouldn't be just getting by. Like it doesn't happen. And it's such a common thing amongst broad intelligent communities, not just unintelligent communities, but it's just people assume this, and it just drives me crazy. So that's the only thing I would add to that is the fiction that people get paid to influence their reviews. It's not a thing that happens, for sure, not now.
And I, as the common man, agree with the educated Matt, but because there's always a but. Like we talked about, I still feel like certain developers and big studios do give preferential treatment to early access and things. They would give those to a review outlet that they think would say something positive, as opposed to an independent Matt that is a wild man and could say anything about Final Fantasy Rebirth, or so there is influence that is beyond the scope of sliding, $1,000 to Matt Storm and their critical mind. I don't think that affects things as much as some people who think that, the Game Awards are rigged and blah, 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 and all that nonsense that we really shouldn't have any time for anyway. But there is influence that is non-monetary, but it does not... When my biggest problem is simply people who don't play games finding games, I don't think that it doesn't even touch anything that would then return monetarily to a video game company. That just does not happen. Like $1,000 doesn't turn into $1 million in sales.
No.
Yeah, it would be Pollyanna-ish to think that money is never a factor, but this kind of thing, it's good to be skeptical, but it is not a conspiracy. This is just like a super quick side tangent. This is the same when people say like, well, who funded that study? That does not always correlate. Causation is not correlation. Correlation is not causation, excuse me. Just because like the toothpaste and like Crest funded the study and it came out saying that, the toothpaste Crest is good, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. That I don't know. That's a whole other thing. Researchers have talked about this on Twitter and Blue Sky better, so I won't get into it. There is actually one final piece of community correspondence that I'd like to read that we didn't talk about, that I kind of feel strongly about. Kind of. This is from Mikey Tabletop, Discord regular, formerly of 0-2 Heroes. Mikey says, reviewers are way too lenient with giving out 10 out of 10s. A 10 out of 10 is a perfect game. No complaints, there's nothing wrong with it. It is perfect in all aspects. I think that is such a rare occurrence, not just in video games, but in any art form. I think people take 10 out of 10 to mean it's a really good fucking game. No, it's a perfect game with no flaws. And I don't think they are nearly as frequent as reviewers should have you believe. There were several like this and 100 reactions. John followed up, John from the Video Game Lounge. He says, I have mostly stayed away from critics and reviews in recent years. Big gaming podcasts like Kind of Funny and Beyond seemingly think games can only be a 7 or a 10 on a scale of 1 through 10, just like Kotaku and IGN. And these sites and podcasts also try to convince you that a 7 out of 10 game is dog shit. But why use a 1 out of 10 if other numbers exist on the scale? They have meaning and purpose as well. What I have done in recent years is watch and listen to game reviews on YouTube. And he goes on to kind of talk about what we did with knowing the critic's voice. I disagree with this wholeheartedly. I do not think that a 10 means objectively perfect because there is no such thing. I am kind of moving towards being pretty against the numbers ranking system for, symphonies or plays or television shows or games. The more I think about it, the more it kind of rubs me in a way I don't like. I don't like ranking art. And it's so funny because I held for years, like when people would talk about who's your favorite classical saxophonist. You guys have a favorite that you want to share, by the way? No? Wow, I'm surprised. But when people would talk about that, my response was always the same. At a certain level, it becomes moot. It's a meaningless conversation to have because there is no better at a certain point. Now, of course, like if you took my fourth grade student compared to Timothy McAllister at the University of Michigan, yeah, I mean, there's a better in this conversation. But once true art is being created, that doesn't mean anything. So too here, like, and this is something, if you go back and listen to the early episodes of my show, you're going to hear us like say, oh, I give this a 1 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. And it's like, at the time I was like, yeah, you got to use the whole scale. But now it's like, I want to throw the scale away. I've outgrown its usefulness. I know it's a shorthand. Like 7 out of 10 means something to people. 7 out of 10 means a certain kind of game, that it's good, but it's got flaws. It's not amazing, but it's fun. Like, I know that's a shorthand in the culture. I get it. But I think it's become dangerous to talk about them in such numbered terms, in such ranked terms. I think we should all be cautious using this. All this to say, no, I think 10 out of 10 is achievable, just like in employee evaluations. Have you ever been at a company that said, we don't give anybody 5s because there's always room to improve? Yeah, it's dog shit. So too here. 10 out of 10s can't exist. I mean, even if you're being subjective, but that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like I said anything cogent there, but that's kind of my thoughts on it. Do away with the system. I think 10 out of 10s can exist and do exist, and that's fine. Jeez, I'm going to edit this back and be so mad that I just kind of vomited this whole thing out. But what say the two of you?
We can always come back for round 2. I'd be down for another 2 hours.
We'll just have to do the whole thing over again. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh shit. Sorry guys, I wasn't recording.
I think that was perfectly cogent. I think also, like, first of all, I love you, Mikey Tabletop. You're a delight. I love talking to you. But I don't agree. I don't agree either. I gave a 10 out of 10 to Citizen Sleeper 2. Not because it's a perfect game, but it's perfect to me. It's all subjective, right? And I totally hear you, Rick, about the number thing, which I've started using in my written reviews. And I also am someone who doesn't.
that wasn't a jab. By the way.
No, not at all.
It totally was actually.
All right, Mike. Look, listen, chill, right? No, but like, I think that I think the problem is that you're right, Rick, in the sense that it's weaponized. The out of 10 scale is weaponized, and anyone who goes to a website and jumps to the bottom of a review and sees the score and goes, I know what I need to know, is defeating the purpose of that number. I think that number is well used when I've written 1,000 words about why Eternal Strands is an 8 out of 10. And I've explained thoroughly why, or why Citizen Sleeper 2 is a 10 out of 10, right? I think, I guessed it on a podcast recently where they did a scale of you, out of 10 U's, like out of 10 Matts, because an out of 10 scale should be about you. It should be about what you think of a game, not this 10 is better than that 10. And but I do agree also on the other side that the scale is weaponized for 7 out of 10. Star Wars Outlaws was one of my favorite games in the Star Wars universe. It is a 7 out of 10 ass game. There are problems with it, but I had a blast playing through that game. And I think a 7 out of 10 describes it perfectly if it's used correctly. But the problem is we can't standardize any of that. And I think that's why it's dangerous. And I totally agree with you wanting to get away from it, Rick. I kind of kick myself for diving into it, but I'm seeing where it goes. And I mean, there are Patreon articles, right, for 40 people to read. Like I can change it as I go and as I see fit, because I have no boss except myself. And I'm a dick sometimes. But to get
my rankings are between me and God.
Exactly. But like to actually put a point on this, I think that the problem with Greater Critique and with the number scale is that there's no uniformity. And so unless you know me and know my work, and it goes back to knowing the critic, then my 10 out of 10 or my 7 out of 10 or my 11 out of 10 for Quest 64 on the N64 home console is more understandable if you know where I'm coming from. But just broadly looking at that number, you'll look at it and go, well, I don't agree. I thought Eternal Strands was terrible. It should have been a 6 out of 10. Why did you give it an 8 out of 10? I think that's where we get to the murkiness of all this, is that there's no uniformity amongst it. We're all just making it up as we go along. And then there's 5 out of 5 and like 3.5s. It's just like it's just, again, there's no consistency throughout the critical landscape, which muddies a lot of those hard numbers that we want to use as quick hits.
That's the other side of that insidious coin, is that the comparison aspect.
Yeah.
Well, you gave this a 7 and you think it's better than this 6? Well, that comes down to knowing your reviewer, but that is so that is just deleterious to the entire idea of art. I don't know. Sorry, Mike. This whole thing has just been stepping in front of Quest 64, saying I'm Quest 63. I go first, and then you can go. That's how numbers work. Sorry,
It
Mike.
is. Yeah. No, I'm absolutely loving this, so do not apologize at all. Yes, I as well also think that the biggest problem is numbers, because it's the easiest thing to record and report and to read. And it's the lowest common denominator, literally. Like, the quickest thing you can do is type in, avowed plus Reddit and find the score. And that's a problem. And like Rick said, just as big of a problem is like lists, because those are bumped up to the top of most algorithms as well. You ask what's the greatest video game of all time, every list is going to tell you Ocarina of Time. But I would love to listen to Matt talk about why Dragon Age Origins is just as good a game as Ocarina of Time. And if you sat and listened to it without playing either game, I think that most average people would be hard-pressed to choose which game they think is better based on his argument, outside of one scored a 10 and one scored a 9.9, show me the numbers kind of thing. And if we took the numbers out of everything and people were forced to read long, well-written critiques, we'd probably all be better off, but that's not reality.
Well said, yeah.
We would be better off. It won't happen. I don't think that'll ever happen.
No.
It's just coming down to it, the comparison. Like, how do you judge a string quartet being better than another? Like, on what merit? On a compositional, who does a fugue better? Maybe, okay, yeah. That's an objective thing. But when it becomes what is the greatest X of all time, and it's a very subjective thing. And again, I think it goes back to if I ask Matt what the greatest game of all time is, what I'm really asking, the nested question here is, I'm asking Matt to tell me about themselves.
Yeah.
That's what that comes down to. But the public at large, I think, doesn't think of it that way. They see it as a surface level declarative comparison, and that's where things get a little dissonant and toxic and not good. Can you believe it that it only took us an hour and 37 minutes to completely crack what makes a good critic? And this is the
right,
be-all,
exactly.
end-all.
Yep.
Nobody needs to listen
Solved
to
it.
anything else.
Yeah, we figured it out.
Yeah, we beat it. No, this was good. And as always, my head was swimming today with where we could take this. I have notes that we didn't get to. I want to shout out again The Limits of Critique by Rita Felsky. Very affordable as an ebook if that's how you like to read your stuff. Probably could find it as a free PDF if you wanted to. Although I don't advocate for doing your reading on screens that don't use e-ink. Don't do that. We didn't get into your post, Mike, where you brought in a lot of replies on this question. I admit I did not write any of them down. A lot of them just said ye or yes. But I think, the questions you asked and the follow-up questions that you got, the handful of them, I think we touched on everything here. Although, as I said at the top, this is not a punctuated conversation. We invite you to keep this going, whether it is in the Discord or on Blue Sky, wherever. Please do. You can tag us. You can join the Discord and @ us, whatever you would like to do. And if you are interested in finding those ats, this is a segue. You can check the episode description, because it's now that time where we talk a little bit about who's here. Matt, you've been on the show before. Fun and Games is a terrific podcast that does a mixture of topic conversations between Matt and Jeff, as well as the aforementioned Side Quests series, which sees guests from all walks coming in to talk about a game that they love and why. I did an episode on Ziga Saga, hoi, hoi, hoi. Xenosaga Episode 1, which I wrote out. I think it's fine. It's okay. Most recently, you got Try from My Life in Gaming, one of my very favorite YouTube channels. They are one of the best in the game. I don't know how they don't have more subscribers. To talk all about a Kirby game. I don't remember quite which one, but if you would like to talk a little bit about fun and games and the stuff that you're up to, by all means, let us know what's new, what you've been working on, and where we can find you.
Sure. Yeah. I'm mostly only active on Blue Sky these days. I'm djstormageddon.com there, which is also my URL to find all the things that I do. Try came on to talk about Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and then mostly went on a tirade about 3D platformers and why they make him cry. And I loved it. It was great. It was delightful. Try is awesome. And I agree about My Life in Gaming. Absolutely. But Fun and Games is a broad topic-based podcast that me and Jeff Moonen host. And it started as an excuse to just talk about broad topics within the gaming space, but we've gone on to interview incredible composers, voice actors, game developers, both indie and more, talk about specific indie games we love, genre retrospectives, console retrospectives. I have some ideas percolating in the future to bring Rick on for that we've chatted about offline, and I'm excited to hopefully make those come true this year. It's been great. We most recently had Alex Stumpley on from, I believe that's how I pronounce his last name. He's the rules lawyer, effectively, from 20-Sided Tavern, which is a D&D improv show that's off Broadway in New York. And he came to talk about choices in video games. And we discussed why choices matter, what makes a good choice and a bad choice in a game. It was really great conversation. We've done console retrospectives about the Xbox 360 with previous punching bag mentioned and friend of the show Dave Jackson. We've done some really cool stuff over there, and I hope folks will go check it out. I also do a more focused show called Reignite. Started as a Mass Effect podcast, went on to then do Andromeda. Once we were done with that, we're like, I guess we'll romance more people in Dragon Age. And so that's where we are now. We're doing Dragon Age 2. And we will, of course, talk about the recently released Dragon Age, the Veilguard, in probably 2 years because we take our time. Like I said, if you want to check out all the stuff I do, just go to djstormageddon.com. That's the best place to find it. And Rick, thank you for having me on the show again. This is always a blast. Love chatting with you. And it was fun to be here.
Of course, the pleasure is mine. I mean, you have an open door policy. You can come in anytime you want onto this show. Truly, really. Now, Mike, you are new to the show and you don't have a podcast. Wait for it, because you have sense.
Yes.
However, every time, I've got one joke and I plan to get my money's worth. But you do, interestingly, run what kind of started as a shitposting account and continues to be sort of a shitposting account, half a shitposting account, half a spread the good word of Quest, and an extra half because who cares? Numbers don't matter anymore in this 2025 America. A third half of just being authentically sincere about video games and talking about them in a way that sidesteps this duplicitous irony that we see so much. Do you want to, forgive me, I don't know how to approach this. What would you like to say about what you do on the internet?
I don't know. I'm Mike. I run Quest 64 Official, and I guess I'm like a vigilante algorithm manipulator is the best way to put it.
I love that.
Yeah, I just invade internet spaces, and then I try to funnel all of that engagement to people like Matt and Rick, and more so trying to smooth the edges of the internet so when my kids are old enough to hate Twitter, that it wouldn't be such a terrible place as it is now while I'm on it, I guess. Video games deserve better, and I'm trying to be better, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a noble pursuit.
Yeah.
They do deserve better. Even whether you want to follow for the Brian memes, for the good word of Little Caesars, which, I mean, I'll say it, is my favorite pizza chain.
Hell yeah.
I'll say it proudly.
Matt won't
don't
say
look
that,
at the sodium.
We can say it.
Or the genuine talk about games. I think Quest 64 is a good mutual to have. And you can find links to Brian and all of his N64 glory in the episode description, as well as links to Fun and Games, Reignite, and Matt's stuff, as well as stuff to Pixel Project Radio's online presence, the Discord, which again, please feel free to join and continue this conversation. We did not get to everything that we wanted to talk to. We did not get to elaborate on everything we wanted to elaborate upon. And we invite you to do so. Hold us accountable, continue it. You can also find the Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok. Those are new. I do TikTok now. God help me. Thirst Traps minimal, though not off the table. You can find all of that inside. You can do ratings and reviews if you would like to on any platform that you choose. I don't read them on the show anymore, but I do read them. I do check for them all the time, and that's very much appreciated. Manipulate the algorithm. It's always a good time. So once again, Matt and Mike, Matt from Fun and Games and Reignite, Mike from Quest 64 Official, thank you both so much for joining me. This was enlightening, this was entertaining, and this was enjoyable. Several other adjectives that may or may not begin with E. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. This was a blast.
Thank you, Rick.
With that, as they said, I am Rick. I am your host of Pixel Project Radio. We're signing off for now. See you next time.